welcome to our channel where we set out to explore wonderful great works of literature.
Wow.
Dressed in elegant clothing.
Because?
Why the hell not?
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Let's
Cool.
get into it.
Let's get into this one. So, I just wanted to introduce, we have a wonderful novel by the Italian author Luigi Pirandello.
Oh, good pronunciation.
Thank you. So he was an Italian dramatist, novelist, poet, short story writer, and he's well known for his plays. However, he was awarded the 1934 Nobel-prize in Literature for, they say, quote, his almost magical power to turn psychological analysis into good theater. So, talking about psychological analysis, this book, entitled One, None, and 100,000, is all about psychological analysis.
Yes.
Almost like to the nth degree.
Yeah, and how it can go wrong.
And how it can go absolutely wrong as well. Wow. So where to begin?
Where do we
So
begin?
as we started this novel,
Yes.
Ava had picked up from a secondhand bookshop Krishnamurti's collection of interviews that he had over the years.
It's called To Be Human.
To Be Human.
Yeah.
So let's just quickly note here, Krishnamurti was born in 1895 and he died in 1986. And he's considered a unique spiritual figure who traveled and lectured throughout the world until his death at the age of 90. His talks are preserved in more than 70 books. And you can actually go on YouTube and, there's quite a number of lectures that he has. And he was a very...
It wasn't filmed for until like the 60s?
60s, 70s almost, right?
Yeah.
And so he started doing sort of lectures, not even lectures, I don't think you'd call them lectures, but talks in front of large auditoriums and audiences. And sometimes he'd have interviews with scientists at the time, well-known scientists, to talk about sort of the greatest issues of our time, right? And what does it mean to be a human? So what is the nature of religion and philosophy and psychology? And he embraced all those things. So there was, as we were reading both these books, we were just observing a tremendous overlap between them. So we wanted to cover them both together to help inform one another. So
Yes.
One Nun and 100,000. Now that's a very curious title. But essentially what happens, this whole novel starts off when the main character, the protagonist himself, it's kind of like he's speaking directly to the reader.
Yeah, like a narrative.
Yeah, very much directly to the reader, and he was saying it all really
It's like a monologue.
Yeah.
At times.
Yeah, and so he said it all kind of started off when his wife told him that his right nostril is lower than his left nostril, and it completely shattered his entire worldview.
Yeah.
Like it not only shattered his worldview, but more importantly, it shattered his own self-image.
Yeah.
And
Can I just interject
about
a funny story? I didn't know I had a lazy eye for the longest time until I went to university.
Yeah.
And this guy, we were studying together, and he's like, what are you talking about? You have a lazy eye. Like, I was talking about some other girl in our class had a lazy eye, and I'm like, no, I don't. And I had a very similar experience to Krishnamurti after that. I was like, oh my god, I do have a lazy eye.
Not Krishnamurti,
Luigi in the book, the narrative of the main character.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my side rant. Okay, going back.
Yeah, very good, very interesting. So essentially, he always thought he was like very much a well-proportioned, handsome fellow, and I'm sure he still was considered handsome by his wife and whatnot. But he realizes Moscarda is his name, and he realizes he's not actually as well-proportioned as he thought he was, well-balanced. And so he starts to see these kind of like defects in other people too, and he notices certain things in other people, and he decides, I'm going to not lie to them. I'm going to tell them how they see themselves, how I see them, versus how they perhaps see themselves.
And not just that, that he noticed, all of a sudden, the way I see myself isn't how other people see me.
That's precisely the entire thrust of this novel, is this idea of images upon images upon images, reflections in a mirror. So he starts to spend more and more time gazing at his reflection in the mirror and realizing that not only do other people have images of us, almost like caricatures of us, but aspects of ourselves. So, let's say, for example, like Ava's perception of me is not the same image of me as I have of myself, which also means that my image of myself is also not a real adequate reflection of my true self, or who I really am. So in a way, there's like this play upon reflection upon reflection upon reflection to uncover what is the truest reality. And a lot of his works kind of like predate the existentialists and like Sartre and like the absurdist movement, right? That kind of like explored some of these ideas philosophically. But what he does is he plays with it in a work of literature that's it's kind of comical. It's actually quite comical. And he decides to take on this bold experiment to see if he can completely extrapolate and remove and extricate from himself all false aspects of who he is. And as
all images that have been like almost bestowed upon him, like
from other
his
people.
Father, a lot of it from his father, and even from himself in a way, that he never argued that he was anything different before.
Like he kind of like, he was rather sort of like a truly privileged person. He was the son of a banker. His father was very successful, and he gave all of his inheritance to his son, and essentially his son doesn't even need to work for a living, but he now has these two friends of his who are directed to take over the bank and all of the funding and the financing and sort of the accounting. And
this is his father. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so he gets a stipend, he gets an allowance, Mascarda, right? Mm-hmm. And so in his eyes and in the public's eyes, he kind of is like a usurer, right? So he's become almost like this sense of like someone who just takes money and just uses it. He's a bit of a rake. He doesn't really work an honest living. Yeah. And so again, one of the elements in the book is, one of the scenes is he tries to recapture people's imagination or images of who he truly is, because he doesn't want to be considered labeled as this usurer or this horribly profligate and sort of very foolish type person.
And he kind of uses the same. It was just very fascinating because he uses very similar analogies to what Krishnamurti talks about. So he talks about how the imprint of his image is so deep and deeply embedded that even if he tries to change his character dramatically with very, very obvious
radical shifts,
objective facts, objective acts, he cannot change it. And it makes me think of a quote from Krishnamurti that was like something along the lines of, I don't want to butcher it, but if you think of your image of other people almost like a footprint, or of anybody, it's a footprint. When you first meet someone, the indentation of the print is light. So you even before the person speaks, you might already have preconceived notion of who they may be based on how they look, how they speak.
So you have an outline. You have an outline of the contours of a footprint or a person's personality.
Yeah.
The first
time, and then the second time that imprint is even deeper, and then the third time it's fixed. It's there. It's no longer, that imprint is in your mind. Its rigidity is less likely to change.
Yeah, and it makes it harder to change one's mind about a person after you've made that imprint.
Or about people, about you, right? And I'm sure we've all been in this situation where, there's examples of that where he talks about that in this book, where he gives examples of criminals who go to change their life dramatically, yet they're always a criminal, or people who have done remarkable things and then they do the most horrendous crime, and yet no one changes they still see them as this like really benevolent person, and this was just madness, this was just something that came over them. They don't see it as the same person. And so he talks about, can I even change who I am?
Yeah, exactly. And there's this really comical part where he's so fixated in the mirror, and he's trying, and it's deeply philosophical too, but so there's this one moment where he realizes that he's trying to look into the reflection, and he sees the reflection in the mirror of the Mascarda as a wholly other, like a completely different person that is not truly him, but almost like a reflection or an image or a doppelganger of him in the mirror. And what he's trying to do, he's trying to look at the mirror in his reflection without the reflection noticing he's looking in the mirror at the reflection himself. And so what he's trying to do, and it's really weird because he's like, I'm closing my eyes, and I also know as I close my eyes, the reflection, the other Mascarda, is also closing his eyes, and when I open them to try to catch him in the act, he's also paying attention as well and has eyes open watching me. And so what he said he's trying to do there, he's like trying to catch himself, observing himself in the act of living. And in that way, he realizes that it's impossible to catch oneself in the act of living. Ava can see me living. She can see my body movement. She can see my intonation. If she can hear my intonation, she can see the micro expressions. I cannot see that. Even though this is me, it is something that is a me that only she can actually objectively attest to, which is also simultaneously her subjective impression of me. And so it gets to this philosophical notion, and I think I made a connection with electrons, which may not be very interesting for people, but it's called the uncertainty principle, which is the idea that for an electron to find out its velocity, you cannot know its exact coordinates. So you can either know the coordinates or you can know the velocity, but you cannot know both with certainty absolutely at the same time. The same idea, movement is life. Life is constantly in flux. It's always happening every millisecond of millisecond of millisecond. But in order to observe something in its entirety as life in itself and capture that moment as if in a picture is impossible, because then it's no longer life. Yeah. It's not a true reflection of what is real. And so it plays along with this, and Krishnamurti does a fabulous job of actually showing that like our entire edifice of what we consider real is just images upon images that are created through our thoughts, and that these are all thought forms, that we're not reacting to someone necessarily, we're reacting to an image of somebody, in many ways. If we're having an argument with someone, or we feel sad, we go to the movie theater, we cry because our favorite character died, we know at the same time that these are all play actors, right? But we've somehow attached ourselves to them. We've created an image of them that reflects our own selves, right?
And I just wanted to make a point that I just thought was a good connection too, is part of the humor of this book is also there's an element where you also see him a bit childlike, that we think of young toddlers when they first discover their reflection, or an animal for that matter, and they see and they go, oh, this is a new person, or it's a surprise. It's like, who is this person? Is this me? Is it really me? Oh, when I wave it. And so there's that humorous element, but then I also think it's playing and dancing with the idea of what Krishnamurti is talking about, where in order for us to essentially strip all of these thoughts, and what are thoughts attached to but memory, and knowledge, not wisdom, but knowledge, compounded upon knowledge. In order to strip all of that, we almost have to look through the lens of an infant, of a newborn babe. And I just thought that was an interesting connection, where it's this idea, and both play with the idea of a mirror, like, look at yourself. Is that really you? Who are you? And we see children do that, so I think there's like quite a bit of play with that concept too.
Absolutely. And one of the other things about Krishnamurti, just to build on what you said about that association of memory and thought, Krishnamurti associates thought and memory with time. So literally we are all embodied in time because we have memory, because we have thought. Thought is a reflection of time. It's an aspect of time. So is memory. And in a way, what Krishnamurti is asking us to do is to escape time. And it sounds rather fanciful, and it sounds very mystical. And in a way it is, but in a way it is by having a thoughtless thought, by being in a state where you can have no more thought images in your mind. The pure state of meditation is how he describes it. That is outside time. Time is no longer working on you. Time is no longer a sense of now and then later, before, after. It's again, that temporality is removed from it.
Yeah, like he'll use the example of, have you ever just unplanned, you're in your time of leisure, and you're just sitting and you have nowhere to go, nowhere to be, and you look out the window and you see birds just fluttering around, and you're just watching, and you have no concept of time.
Yeah.
And it's not until you say something like definite, like, that's a beautiful bird, aloud to yourself, or oh, isn't that a beautiful noise, or isn't it a beautiful day?
Right.
And then we become distracted, and then we notice time. But if you're just purely, truly listening, what I say listening or watching, the image of what that means, it doesn't matter. It's not there. And I think that's what the book,
One Nun and 100,000.
That's a long title anyway.
Yeah.
What it's playing with is how, as somebody's discovering this as a, a imperfect human, what happens in the real world.
Yeah. Well, before we get into like the actual way in which, in a way, he kind of is implementing Krishnamurti's realizations and sort of like wisdom, right? And in a way, he's going only part way or most of the way, and then kind of messing up a little bit along the way.
Making a little bit,
but
a lot of the way.
We can get into that, but I did want to just mention the title, One Nun in 100,000, and you might think, what a curious title. Actually,
what does that mean? What did you
So this is essentially what the self is. He is coming to these throughout the book, he's coming to various realizations that is yourself, your true self, is it a whole unity? Is it a one? Is it just Ava, Shant? Or is it nothing? Is it a void? Is it kind of like the Buddhist notion of sort of like the void that resides in being, where there is no self, right? Which is there's a controversy with regard to whether Buddhists, certain schools of Buddhism actually adhere to that. The Theravadan Buddhists actually adhere to that.
Which, by the way, Krishnamurti did not affiliate with any religion.
He didn't, no. And then 100,000, or are we such a multiplicity of personalities and people that not only are we refracted in so many different versions of ourselves, but people also see us as different me's and different yous. So, do you want to talk a little bit about how he kind of messes it up a little bit?
Okay. Those are the humorous elements, I feel like, because, essentially, in order to do what Krishnamurti is talking about, and to do what the main character in this book, Muscarda, is trying to do, is it's almost like you have to die. And I know that sounds weird, but you have to completely strip yourself of any knowledge, of any, not practical knowledge, but any almost like bias, internal bias, which we all have.
But it's like to die before you die.
To die, exactly. To die before you die.
Yeah.
So you're essentially not even human in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
It's to transcend human, to be, what we consider human.
And so if we think about that, I mean, if we really think about that, that's, which you're not supposed to if you're trying to attempt to do it. But if we really think about that, to me, that's terrifying. I think to most human beings, it's so terrifying we don't even consider it as an option.
Well, in society, we so sanitize the idea of death, and we keep it at bay for so long until almost the last minute, where we actually have to start reflecting on our own mortality. Like whether it's in a nursing home or a hospice or something, like where we keep it on the margins of our society. We don't openly, like in more sort of older civilizations and societies and more tribal societies, death is always ever present. And, there's a propitiation of the spirits and the ancestors, and the dead in many ways are living alongside the living, right? Whereas in our society, we're such a taboo about death, and even
but I'm not even speaking about death. Like, death in itself is terrifying.
I just mean the obstacles for encountering death and imagining it even in this sense is even more challenging.
Even so, we find the reality of death, which is inevitable, terrifying.
Yeah.
So can you imagine? Just imagine for this moment how terrifying that is, even in today's world, I'd say even more so in today's world.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, for most people to even
fathom such an operation.
Yeah. And so, there's this, he makes these mistakes along the way, I think, because he's grappling with the fear of that, the fear of oh my gosh, my wife has no clue who I am,
Mm-hmm.
really, ultimately, because I didn't. And I was just being who I wanted her to love.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't really me. And then the realization of that, of everyone around me doesn't even know who I am. Do I even know who I am?
He speaks of his wife's genge. And genge is kind of like the diminutive, cutesy term that his wife gave him. And he was like, how absurd the idea that, like, as my wife is like hugging me and kissing me and wanting to make love with me, she's actually cheating on me in a way with this other genge who she thinks is her husband, when in fact, you know, the husband whom she's embracing, she knows nothing about, because the true husband is nothing like the one she imagines him to be.
Yeah.
So one of the things, like, do you find that, like, you and I noticed this as we're reading this, the first 1/3 of the book is quite heavy going, in the sense that it's like these very circular, repetitive, seemingly like circuitous, torturous sentence structures, right?
Yeah.
Where they seem so reflexive, I guess, upon one another, that it almost like sometimes it feels like you're reading like a deep, you know, very dry philosophical text.
I think that's part of the point of it, though, too, that, you know, it's to show how heavy thought is, that how distracting thought is,
and how circular,
and how it's so far removed from even the essential things we need to know ultimately, even in a story. And then you're right, as it goes through, it's not as circular. It becomes more clear, I guess. But anyway, I wanted to go back to, you know, why is this element of being so afraid prevalent? Well, what is fear? Krishnamurti talks about this. Fear is very self-centered, if we think about it. Very, I has to be in fear. What will happen to me? What will happen to my friends? Possessive. Any really image or thought is very possessive. And so that's what I noticed. I was like, he's not, every time he made a mistake, it was when either this fear entered. So what's fear but an image has to come to mind. A thought has to come to mind if there's a fear. And very then self-centered. So, you know, there'd be things like, for example, he was trying to change his name, change who he was by first taking away the possession and the home that he owned, that he was leasing to this gentleman. And then as soon as he does that and has this big explosion, like, not an explosion, that's not the right word. The man becomes very volatile and upset. Of course, his whole house has been stripped away from him. And then as soon as he does that, he says, don't worry, I'm going to give you
a better place.
And it's your own. You don't have to lease anymore. It's all your own.
So he does these very eccentric things that are so unexpected
and so
out of character.
And so rather than being like, this is a one or the other, bad or good person, everyone's just like, he's mad. And in a way, he explains he was kind of going mad. In a way, with grappling with the idea of this images. And no one sees the truth. Everyone just has images. And you wanted to give another example of like how he goes mad? Kind of some of the mistakes he makes along the way.
Trying to think off the top of my
with
head.
His wife and then the friend.
You can explain if you can recall it to mind.
Well, so of course he then wants to remove all of his assets out of the bank, as well as,
and he has like a considerable
amount, as well as like anything his father had contributed, and he's going to give it all away to charity, essentially. So he's stripped of all possession.
And in this sense, he was experimenting, because essentially what he wanted to do was remove from the public imagination sort of their image of him as some sort of like rake who just kind of like lives off his father's sort of wealth and whatever, right? So he wanted to fool everyone. But I guess one of the ways in a way that was a mistake is, again, he's trying to prove to other people, he's trying to change their images of him. But in Krishnamurti's sort of, I would say, criticism of this gentleman would be more in the sense of like, if you feel like you need to, if you're still holding on to what other people think about you or have images of you, and you still want to correct that, you're still stuck in that thought form, right? You haven't escaped yet that. precisely
and
that.
also
Yeah.
it would bring to the point, do you ever really know what other people think of you? Like,
Yeah.
that's an impossible feat.
Yeah.
So why are you trying? Like, that would be his point. Why are you trying? You will only ever see the world through your lens. You can never go into someone else's mind and see them through it's impossible.
Through their eyes.
So why try, you know? It'll only end in conflict. It will only end in suffering, which is what he shows. And so anyway, he's trying to strip himself of anything he's ever been just given, essentially. He even contemplates stripping himself of his name for quite a while.
Yeah.
But in doing so, his wife becomes very upset and scared and thinks he's going mad. And I don't know if she does it or, the father just finds out through word of her father. So his father-in-law, Moscato's father-in-law, comes, and he has also a huge share in the bank. And so obviously if someone's removing a lot of money from the bank, that makes people afraid. And so he's trying to convince him of otherwise, that, you're mad. What about my daughter? Like, you promised her this, X, Y, and Z, and now you don't care. You're financially stripping. And I would say that's also something that I found very interesting.
Yeah.
It was like, there was an element of quite a bit of selfishness. It was like, he was only thinking of removing himself from other people's image of him.
He was essentially cutting off all sorts of relationships and bonds that people have established, whether they're authentic or not. It's like, it's still a cruel business to cut yourself off from, essentially void yourself from all human relation without any consideration of the other people in your life too, right?
Yeah.
But that is essentially what it means to die.
But I mean, he also had like a solution to that. He's like, I could be a doctor, I could be a lawyer, I could be. He's like, I could go back to school, I could do anything, and I just want this for myself, to make money for myself. And you could see the greed in the father-in-law, that it was just far not what he had hoped for his daughter, to go through that kind of financial, I guess, tumultuous time.
And it's interesting because in a way, it's just like, it kind of also speaks. I just think about this now. Kind of speaks to development. It's just like, in many ways, there are certain people who see us in a particular light, in a particular image, and if we grow out of it, or we change in some way, maybe even for the better, not necessarily for the worse.
Or maybe neither way, it's just neutral.
Change,
right?
yeah, but people don't like that.
No.
Some people actually, a lot of people, there's a sense in which they are comfortable with the image that they've created of you.
Yeah,
right?
Perfect. Yeah, and actually, that's like another point that Krishnamurti makes, is that thought is always seeking security. And you see, again, elements of this. No matter what, the thought was some sort of security. So even though he was trying to strip himself of everything and get rid of that financial security, he wanted to have the security of being his own person. So even that thought created a sense of security, which is very interesting. But yeah, everyone around him seemed, even if they didn't particularly like the guy, if he tried to change who he was in their view dramatically, he was mad. He was insane. He was unsettling. They didn't like that. It was something worse than even a criminal. Yeah. Because even criminals have intention, or in reflection, people might be like, they always had this kind of X, Y, and Z character,
It kind of reminds me, like, of other things I've been reading, but it's just like, with shamans and sort of like people who delve in sort of like, I guess, like healers or people who are in the margins of society, who are always in the sort of tribal societies and ancient societies. These people were always the other, right? There's a radical alterity of these people, and they were always put in the margins because there was a danger to them, because they were so close to this sense of like death. Really, it is. It's kind of that same contagion that we feel. And in a society, we try to keep those things outside the city walls, right? But when someone within the city walls is undergoing that same thing, madness is the thing that we attribute to it.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, and Krishnamurti talks about this, is like organized religion, no matter what it is always an image. Like the church is an image. He plays with this, and this isn't to criticize anything. It's just, we seek security even in the divine. Yeah. And so then,
or an image of the divine.
Image of the divine. And that's why we have symbols. That's why we have statues. That's why we worship in churches. And, he criticizes that he's never walked into a church because he sees, it just as a way to imitate God and imitate God's worth rather than actually trying to discover what God's purpose really is. And Krishnamurti dabbles with that too, that, be careful because, some doctrine, whether it's, the communist red book, whether it's Hinduism, whether it's the Bible, doesn't really matter. Whatever, if it's scripture telling you what to do, political ideology, whatever it is, if it's telling you what to do with all certainty, it's already stripped out the question of truth.
Yeah.
Because it's already
contained it within
pushed you to a purpose,
and it's already contained it within its strict parameters and a particular
and
thought,
created
mode of thought.
security. So that was my piece. It creates security. So even in whether it's a shaman or a spiritual belief, on one side, people, if it's so foreign to you, yes, we can other them, but on the other side, we could switch and start worshiping them because it gives us the certainty of what the afterlife is.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think another thing that Krishnamurti says that was really quite profound is this idea of movement and stillness. And that, like, for movement to happen, which we take for granted every waking second, right, of the day, there needs to be an underlying stillness that actually where movement emerges from. And in that same vein, he speaks of silence. Yeah. And the silence is the root of where all the noise and the sound and words and all this distraction comes from, right? So in order for one thing to be, another one has to be the fundament by which all the other things emerge.
But not to be confused with stagnation.
Exactly. And so so the thing is, it's like what he's talking about, what Krishnamurti is referring to with this sort of like removal of all thought image and sort of the things that we idolize and worship and sort of become concretize in a way, that uncertainty in the sense of security that we seek out, that uncertainty in a way is also a radical uncertainty. Like, like that sense of stillness is a radical uncertainty of all things, but in itself, it becomes the most utter stillness and calm, so that there is no question of certainty or uncertainty. It actually encapsulates all things. So it's not like Krishnamurti is saying, well, you can't be safe or certain about anything, but he's just saying you cannot be safe and uncertain about things that require thought. However, behind thought is stillness and peace. And,
basically all conflict exists from our image of others, our image of things. And
it's transcending the duality, right?
Yeah. And then to kind of tie in with this again, it's like, even the image of, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I'm sure you'll come to it.
It wasn't meant to be.
It's fine. It's fine. Fantastic book.
Yeah.
Wonderful, hilarious in times, sad on other times. Really gets you thinking. Although, according to Krishnamurti, that's not the point.
Yes.
But like, you need thought to transcend thought. You have to get to a point where you can think about these ideas. I don't know if
you'd agree with that.
I think, really, yeah?
I don't know.
Well, I think, like, how else, like, you'd have to use your thought to read the book.
I'm just saying I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know.
I think there's a sense in which these ideas plant seeds in your mind. And if you're ready for it, it could be quite an experience and quite transformative in a real sense.
Yeah, actually, that was my point. It was, that's what I was going to say, that as soon as we, that if we really want to see the person in front of us, like the best way to see the person in front of us is to ask the question of, as if we've never met that person before, and ask everything as a question, because everything is uncertainty. That was the point you were talking about with certainty, in order to have, in order to really be calm, have no conflict, not calm, that's not the right word, have no conflict is the best way, and inner turmoil.
Or tension.
And tension or in true peace.
Yeah.
Essentially, we have to be uncertain about everything. Everything in this world, like an infant. And that's the point I had lost earlier.
Yeah, questioning, uncertain, but not negate. Not in a sense like, I don't want to say negating, because he has a whole chapter about negation here. But yeah, to view things with brand new eyes every waking moment.
Yeah.
And how difficult that is, of course.
And then in this book, it's like eventually he gets there, right?
Yeah, eventually he does.
And at some point, it's a total flip in his character where he doesn't care what he was condemned, what he was condemned.
He's even like surprised that they're still using his name. Like to him, it was like a stranger's name on the lips of someone else.
Yeah. And
he was kind of like in like this
shift.
Yeah. He was like in these sandals and like kind of rags, and almost becomes like an ascetic, almost in this actual like monastery or this monastery.
He was in prison though, right?
It was like it was a workhouse for that he donated with his money, right? Yeah.
So living almost as a pauper with nothing.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And was okay with uncertainty, completely, and with the certainty of others.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the irony is you have to be okay with the certainty of others to some degree, or just.
In a way, that's a hard part as well.
The hardest part, yeah.
In many ways, it's like, if you can do this thing for yourself, you have to not fall into the trap of being frustrated at others when they aren't able to.
Yeah, or with yourself. Like, think about how many times we've, as humans, had an idea about someone and then they totally, completely show a different side to them that shocks us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we have to be. It's almost like you have to predict that everyone is unpredictable.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say about these two?
No.
Okay.
You?
No.
Okay.
What would you?
No, I want you to first.
I say 5 out of 5 for both of them.
Okay. So 5 out of 5 for this one, because this is just more the way
it's written.
It helps. It almost puts you into a meditative state. The way that he writes is completely different, or I guess not even right, the way he speaks, because it's just transcription, right? It's deconstruction of even the way we write, the way we think. And so to me, it was just a totally life-changing experience. And I think it was just so beautiful that we happened to reread both of them, because I think otherwise, if I had picked this up, so much would go over my head. I'd just be like, this person is mad. I don't get it, you know? But I have so much more of an appreciation for this one because of it. But there were times that I was also impatient, which would probably be a criticism if Krishnamurti was in the room. Well, maybe he wouldn't criticize, but he'd be like, what is patience?
He'd be like, ta ta ta.
No, he wouldn't even do that. That would be judgment. He'd just be, what is patience? What is impatience?
Let us sit with it.
But yeah, I think I would give this a 4.7. There, we'll make it short.
That's fine. That's totally fair. And then, I mean, if I were to be entirely fair, maybe a 4.8, 4.9. Maybe I was a little enthusiastic with my 5.
You can be. Don't change it based on mine.
No, not simply based on yours, but I do think there's a sense in which there's a slight, unless you're taking this sentence by sentence, word by word, and looking to reflect deeply and take this as a 6-month read. Some parts of the book are very dense philosophically, and even with the language, it gets kind of like cyclical and repetitive, and you're just like, okay, I understand what you're getting at.
And for me, it was the selfishness that I was like, Wired, for so long are you so incredible? Like, it wasn't even, there's just, and ultimately I know all thought is kind of selfish, but there was like very blatantly selfish part of him that came through that frustrated me just as a reader.
Where he wanted to just sever ties with all relations? Yeah,
not even just, without any sort of thought, a care about how that would impact anyone else.
Yeah.
Like, I think I would probably enjoy a character who also had the turmoil of, because that's how I feel like I would be concerned about how my choices would impact everyone else, even if it was in the end the best choice for everyone. I think anyone with compassion, and I think this character, maybe they just wanted him to not have any real compassion or empathy for others. But I didn't feel like he did.
Interesting.
So that was the part that I found, that's why I rated it lower, because I found that part a bit, I wish they dabbled with that sense of like remorse or empathy for others, that I would want to know how an imaginary world, how someone trying to implement this, how that would act, how that would come to be.
Yeah, very
That's all.
good, very good. All right, well, thank you for joining us. This was a very
Passionate.
energetic, passionate sort of type of a video.
Yeah.
Please leave a comment below if you've read any of these books. Are you familiar with Krishnamurti or maybe even
Maybe
Pirandello?
you'll check out his YouTube videos.
Yeah, you should definitely.
Yeah.
He has such a nice, gentle, soft-spoken voice, and he was such a little man.
I want to hug him.
Yeah, he's very, very gentle soul. Okay, well, anyway, take care, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.